All right. So one of my top 5 most favorite quarterbacks of all time is Matthew Stafford. Watching him play, watching him throw, his leadership ability. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the current situation, what did you see in the dude? He had been in Detroit, hadn't won a playoff game, to know that he was going to be the guy to lead you guys to a Super Bowl.
The thing that jumped off is when you watch him from afar, you see the competitiveness, the ability to activate all parts of the field, the toughness to stand in there and stare down the barrel. I think what gets minimized is how smart this guy is. His big picture understanding, his inventory of recall through the accumulation of reps, his understanding of the game from an all 22 perspective, the way that he works from Monday to Sunday, and then really there's a joy at which he plays. I think the most special thing I can say about him, that's one of them. I could go on and on about the superlatives, but I think, when we talk about competitive greatness, being your best when your best is required, this guy's played in 7 playoff games for us. He's 5-2. The 2 games that we lost against Detroit and Philadelphia this past year in the divisional round, this guy gave us every chance from within the framework of what he could control for that record to be 7-0, and then what happens thereafter. And I think that says a lot about him. When you talk about the elephant in the room, these are the things that are really challenging because there's no discrepancy on us wanting him to continue to lead the way and be our quarterback. The interesting and the challenging dilemma and dynamics within this are, hey, how do you continuously as a head coach look at the short term and the long term and be able to figure out what does that really look like? There's no dispute, and let's not get it twisted in regards to anybody wanting him to be our quarterback. Now, there's layers to it. And as you try to put together the puzzle for your football team, you have to be able to say, hey, how do we continuously build? How do we support him? How do we make sure that he's getting, what is his worth relative to those things? And so, at the end of the day, we had something in mind, he had something in mind, and nobody was right or wrong. And then ultimately you're saying, hey, there's a ton of interest because this guy's an incredible player. And we've had conversations where he could probably play however much longer he wants, but it's been on a year to year in terms of our dialogue. Is that 1? Is that 2? Only he can answer that. But there does have to be an element of understanding, well, what does that future look like without this freaking G that's been our quarterback for the last 4 years? And there's no right or wrong way to go about it. But I do think for us to be able to make the most educated decision in terms of, all right, the cash budget that we operate on, the draft comp that you would get in return, you just need to be able to have all the parameters to at least explore it. And I think the most important thing that's reported out there is when we had these conversations prior to the Super Bowl, I think the important thing was, let's be clear, open, and honest. And this isn't that we're trying to be able to figure out, what is the next right move, but let's at least have all the parameters relative to you and Jimmy Sexton being able to talk to teams that have called on you. Don't want to have to do anything in secret. Want to make sure that we're all abreast of the situation, even though the first goal in mind is to have you come back here as the quarterback. But that's where we're really trying to measure all those things. He and I have had great dialogue throughout this process. I know where we wanted to be able to end up, but these decisions aren't made in a vacuum, and that's kind of the challenging part about it. But love this guy, and he's been incredible for us.
It's your transparency, man. I think that's the biggest thing, and the thing that it just comes naturally to you. But as players, that's all you want. You want honest dialogue and honest conversations. And there's zero reason, especially for a guy like Matthew or a guy like you, to be hiding things and just to have it all out there in the open and talk about it. Ultimately, does the final decision, does it come down to the Rams organization? Is it you making the final decision? Is it Matthew having to make the final decision?
It's us collectively, and it's not just, do you want him as your quarterback? There's no doubt that's what we want, but it's the balance of, all right, what does it look like with, if we can get something done, and then what does it look like without, relative to, maybe extra money that you would have, draft capital you would get in return? What is the contingency plans in place? If it's not him, what does it look like after this stud isn't our quarterback, whether that's 2 years from now here or whether that's, this year. So there's a lot of layers, and I think it's always about collaborating. I will say this though, Fitz, what's been really important to me is, when I look back on it, the Jared Goff situation could have been handled better on my part, in terms of, the clarity of the dialogue in the midst of that. And You never know which direction this is going to go. But when you sit there and you say, man, I definitely, I had some growing up to do, could have done a better job for Jared. There's a lot more respect and, etiquette that he deserved in the way that was handled on my end. That was poor on my part. And you want to make sure that, as you try to apply your, learning lessons from your mistakes, that you're at least trying to communicate with clarity. And it doesn't mean that they're easy, but like I said earlier, I think people just don't like being caught off guard. And this is something that, you have a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out what is best for the short and the long term. And ultimately, there are some business things where it's like, hey, this is not your value to us, but this is how we're trying to be able to build out the whole team. And you're a total freaking stud. And I understand that if, I always feel like if I'm empathetic to the other person's perspective, you can at least have a better understanding. And that's where sometimes some of the, the differences occur. And nobody's right, nobody's wrong. There's just differences in terms of where our responsibilities lie to the collective, as the Rams head coach, and then what he's earned the right to be in positions in terms of the money that he can earn and that he deserves based on his body of work and what he puts into this game.
Yeah, I look back at these situations throughout my career. And I'm sure Fitz, we've both been in these, like throughout when you get to that latter part of your career, it's really starting to what's that balance beam of you feel respected, but you want an opportunity, and, what does that look like? And I think, really just looking at my time in Cincinnati, I think of the Carson Palmer trade and like how that made me feel as a player, and how I still look at that situation and think sometimes, like, I think people forget in that year that he was traded. I mean, you draft A.J. Green, which was a pick they already had, one of the best deep ball guys there was during his time for sure, an absolute freak.
Yeah.
What did Carson Palmer do at a very
deep ball,
elite
baby.
level?
He threw the deep ball, baby.
Beautiful pass ever, right?
Fits.
What else matched up with that? Mike Zimmer comes in, and they have a top 10 defense for the next 5 years. So I just think of like what could have been when you have a guy with not take away any credit from Andy Dalton, but when you talk about a guy of Carson Palmer's caliber. So you really look at like, oh man, you think of those missed stops and you think of how those situations play out. Then I go to, obviously, Sean, an emotional moment for both of us, when the Goff and the Stafford thing happens, right? And it's like, man, on one hand, it's this little brother that I love so much. And then on the other hand, it's like, hey, this is kind of a business team decision of how they feel the best way to go forward. And so you're torn in that situation. Now, that epic moment of, the three of us taking a selfie in Cabo, and then a year to the date, me, you, and Matthew hugging on the field as we win the NFC Championship on the same Sunday night a year from that time, and then going on to win a Super Bowl, like amazing moments. But there's still these things that I think when we talk about connection and all-time friendships and those things, that inevitably these hard situations are going to come up because of the game we play. We play a game that is violent, it is physical, and you are getting closer to your end faster than you ever realize at all times when you're playing the game of football. And there's going to be these things that you hope you've established that last past these decisions. And I think when you think of Matthew, I think of a guy that from the day he got there, when you look at that pyramid you started in 17 that I always talk about, and you talk about process and standards, I mean, the guy sets it at an all-time high, and the way he goes about everything, the human being he is, competitive greatness. There's things you learn from these guys. Like I always say this, the Rams organization will be forever better for having Cooper Kupp be a part of it, because every person that witnessed what it meant to get injured in 2018 and 17, I think of like even his rookie year, you remember this, Sean, he drops a ball, game-winning opportunity against Seattle, bounces back and really shows what his potential is, and continues to never put his head down, but just continue to grind and look for every op. He gets injured, he comes back, has dealt with injuries here lately, but then his Super Bowl year, winning the Triple Crown, like the guy has literally epitomized what it means to work at an all-time effort level, put everything, every little detail. I remember when he tore his ACL, he's literally having the training staff study how high his feet are coming off the ground so he can get in and out of cuts. And he's measuring the distance from the ground to the bottom of his feet so he can practice how fast he can transition in and out of routes. And so like all those things that Cooper Kupp represented, every person who witnessed that will be better for having witnessed Aaron Donald, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford. So their impact's going to live on. But in the current moment, how do we establish what we do to move on now? And that's the toughest part of this decision is, what's the right thing going forward for both sides, for Matthew, for the team, and everyone ending this thing feeling like this is the right decision. And this is how we continue to establish moving forward with the standard that we want to play football at.
Yeah, I think everybody you mentioned is an igniter, and that's as good a compliment as I can give. You, Matthew, Aaron, Cooper, they make people they're around in situations they're a part of better. They elevate everybody else. The thing that's so challenging too is when you know that you're on the latter part on a year-to-year basis, like this is a force multiplier position. Like, when I've talked to them too, and it's like, okay, some of these other teams, it's like your value is immeasurable to us. I don't know how to contextualize and say like your value is immeasurable to us. What I'll never know, here's what's certain, uncertainty, right? You can't say that, okay, like the value is immeasurable, the quarterback position, my belief in terms of everything starts there. It's the most difficult position in all of sports. So you better make sure that you're surrounding that player and you got the right guy at the switch. Learned that from my grandpa and from Bill Walsh. But what's hard about it is when you're saying, okay, what is that timeline where we've got this absolute stud leading the way? And then what does that look like to be able to measure? All right, if in fact it's hard to be able to come to, a consensus in regards. So what does it look like to bring you back? What are the things that you can, get in return to continuously build the team? There's no right way. You could never put a value on how important he's been to us, like especially at a force multiplier position. And that's why you have a lot of sleepless nights. And there's, what you do know is this, there's no doubt in my mind who I want to be our quarterback. Now, how we get to that, because these decisions aren't made in a vacuum, that's the challenging thing. What I do feel good about, and I would hope, and most important thing is not necessarily what the outside say, but like what he feels is that there's at least been communication that's been ongoing and upfront, between us. And that's the most important thing to me. And then I do believe whichever direction this goes, this is an all-time type of friendship, even if it means there might be some uncomfort if it doesn't go the direction we want. In the meantime,
I can remember this, Fitz, early in my career when we got there and we started having success. Sean would have a couple drinks and he'd be like, man, you know what? We got a great deal getting you. I mean, you've been a great free agent. We should have paid you $25 million a year. And I'd be sitting over there like,
well,
what? You could.
You still
right?
can.
I mean, theoretically, right? But no, I say that because even at my end of my career, like obviously I took, my last year going into a season, and I think of these moments, right? Like you look at guys who have either given up money or, or kind of put their feet in the ground and say, I'd rather move on because I'll be happier getting something that makes me feel valued. And I can remember having this decision before our last year, going to the Super Bowl, is that the Rams are in a situation cap wise where a couple of us had to go or we had to figure something out. It didn't end up working out with Michael Brockers. And I took a pay cut to stay with the team. I'd been injured the year before. Had a great season, but got injured at the very last part of the season, came back for the playoffs, which was like one of those epic moments I'll never forget. But I remember making that decision and be like, man, I don't know how valued I feel in this moment, but you know what? Like to me at that time, it felt like, hey, to finish this thing, something I started here the right way meant a lot to me. And that was the most important thing. And I think this thing comes down to that, is that we are human beings before we're anything else. As I've always said in the locker room to the guys, you're a man before you're anything else. And you have to be content and happy with who that is and the decisions you make for you and your family. And so I think sometimes both people can be right. I think the Rams can be right in this situation about maybe where they sit on this thing. I think Matthew Stafford can be 100% correct on what makes him feel valued and what he's put into it and what he thinks his value is. You just hope that, I hope for me personally, obviously I'm biased, I just hope that the connection at the end of the day wins and they find a way to stay together, because I just think, it's just been such an epic run together, and my life's forever changed because of Matthew Stafford and Sean and the Rams. So I love great things that have impacted my life staying together. I'd rather that be the case, but more importantly, I want everybody to be happy, feel valued, and feel like they got what was important to them out of the deal.
And I'll add to that, I think the intentions are right from everybody's perspective. Nobody's a right or wrong. It's just, sometimes those things can't necessarily align, or it takes, a lot more communication and be able to figure that out. The one thing that you said, Fitz, when we were talking in New Orleans about this situation that I really appreciated, that I don't think a lot of people, unless you're really like your vantage point from playing it, this guy does subtle things that you really have to appreciate the intricacies of the game to really understand. For example, watching the Philly game back again. We're running across the board concept where you got a quick game concept and you're progressing back to a 5-step, route combination. We get a 3D sim against Philadelphia. We put FIB formation in the boundary. We jet motion across. They do a nice job in one of their 3D sims of being able to cover our flat stick. So he resets. Their backside end is the hook dropper. And we've got, from the number 2 player coming backside, a basic cut. And it's so subtle, you wouldn't even notice it. And he's able to, just like he did to Von Bell in the Super Bowl.
The coolest no look ever.
And he's able to hold Nolan Smith to expand him, boom, to be able to dot it on Puka Nacua for a big positive gain. And you're like, oh, he just, works across the board at a basic. And it's like, no, mother, it was not like that. He actually manipulated a weak side hook player coming from on the line of scrimmage in a simulated fire zone. And he made it looked like a routine play outstanding because of the intricacies of how he plays. Those are the things that you talked about that, like, you don't take that stuff for granted, and I know I don't either.
Hey, Fitz, I just had dinner last week with Kyron Williams, Puka, Jordan Whittington, and Adonai Mitchell, and we're having this conversation about Stafford, and it was so great because they're talking about it, and Jordan Whittington goes like, hey, man, I had to get used to it. One time I was out in the flat, and he threw a ball to me, and he's just looking at somebody else.
It's so
and he
sick.
goes, it was so great. He goes, when I was in college, if the quarterback was looking at you, he threw it to you. And it was like, outside of that, like, you were done. And it was just funny hearing his perspective of like, man, I had to get used to, like, I don't care where he's looking. I just be ready. I got to be ready because there's no telling when he's throwing the football to me. It was great hearing them dialogue about it.
He baptizes all those defensive players.
Oh, dude,
I love all the film junkies that are like showing zone coverage. Like, where's he supposed to throw the ball? Nobody's open. And it's like, as a quarterback, when you watch Matthew Stafford play and the manipulation with his eyes and his body, and it is such a thing of beauty, man. And that was, along with the toughness and the arm strength and everything else that goes with him. That's why, for me, he's certainly in my top 5 all time of guys I love playing.
Who are the other guys in your top 5?
Well, I always like to just say top 5 so that I don't have to make
he
a
doesn't
whole
actually
list.
want to list.
So for me, though, for me, Brett Favre is in the top 5 for sure. Peyton's in the top 5 just with, the way that he was able to completely control everything. Jake Plummer is one for me too. I grew up an Arizona State fan.
How excited was he on the sidelines for Arizona State in the
he was
college
pumped,
football
man.
playoffs?
Jake the Snake, baby. He's a big handball player now. Yeah, but we've got he's got a pickleball tournament coming up. I think I might go, even though I don't play pickleball, just to see Jake the Snake again. He was like one of my all-time favorites, man. But
Fitz, I'll tell you this. Speaking of all-time favorites, my all-time favorite Matthew Stafford. There's obviously a ton of them. Clearly we could go with the Super Bowl, but it's actually not that. We're in Arizona. This is, obviously still having COVID effects into your season and those kind of things that next year. And we've had kind of a short week. We're in Arizona, and we finally kind of turned the boat. Arizona had an unbelievable start to the season. I think they started 8-0 or something like that. And we're in Arizona trying to take this division back, which we end up actually doing by the end of the season. And Odell's with us, and this is kind of when everything started to officially click. I'll never forget, we throw kind of a half role play action bomb to Van Jefferson, and I'm back there running Chandler Jones around. And Fitz, as I'm running him around, I can hear, you can always hear the crowd reaction. Yeah. What I heard was, dime. And I look, and I'm like, oh, my God, that was out of Stafford's mouth. And so literally he threw it, and he was like, fucking dime. That's what I heard, fucking dime. And right as he let it go, and like, sure enough, I watched Van Jefferson run under it for a touchdown. And I was like, dude, this guy is a legend. So it John Wayne, baby.
It was unbelievable, Fitz. So he's right to left. So he turns over, he has to flip his hips. And this is a 60-yard rope down the pipe right over the top of a post player who had lateral movement. I said, that might be one of the greatest throws I've ever seen. He said that thing came out like a T-shirt gun shooter at halftime at a basketball game.